What is going on, everyone? This is Eric coming at you from just outside of Hartford, Connecticut, and today we're going to continue the rant series as we look at the NL West. Now, right after the 2020 World Series, I did do a LA Dodgers rant, so if you're curious why the Dodgers are not on this list, definitely feel free to check that one out. The link will be in the description below. But today we are going to look at the Arizona Diamondbacks, Colorado Rockies, San Diego Padres, and the San Francisco Giants. Without further ado, we'll jump right in. We'll start with the Diamondbacks. Now, the Diamondbacks, bullet point one here, getting Curt Schilling for basically nothing. Now, obviously, you guys know I'm a Phillies fan, and I don't remember when the Phillies and the Diamondbacks made the Curt Schilling trade. Obviously, that was in 2000, but it was a trade that basically hindsight's 2020, and you look back at it, and you're thinking, wait a second now. The Diamondbacks basically gave up nothing for Curt Schilling. So, seeing that, it's just mind-boggling, and of course, Schilling went on to have an amazing remainder of his career. He was a 10-year vet or something like that at the point when the Diamondbacks got him, but he was a crucial piece in a couple of major runs for multiple teams. Obviously, Arizona's the big one. So it stinks to look back and say, wow, we gave up Curt Schilling for basically nothing. Winning the 2001 World Series. Now, this one's bittersweet. Yes, I love, of course, the Diamondbacks winning the World Series. Anything's better than the Yankees winning the World Series. But obviously, the 2001 World Series was probably the one year that the vast majority of the nation was united behind the Yankees in the World Series. And the Diamondbacks, who were a relatively new team, I believe they were on their fourth year at this point, they went and took the World Series from the Yankees. Now, like I said, any year but 2001, this wouldn't even be a question. I'd be very happy for the Diamondbacks. But in 2001, you kind of had to root for the Yankees. Constantly mediocre. This is a team and a franchise that is literally the definition of mediocre. You know, they say 7-9 for football. It's probably a 79-83 or 81-81 record in baseball. And that's always what the Diamondbacks are. They're always this team that's right around mediocre. And I've discussed this before. Why do you make moves like signing Zach Greinke and Madison Bumgarner to these massive contracts when you're clearly in a rebuilding mood? You should be focusing on rebuilding, but you're never going to be able to rebuild if you keep getting veterans to these big deals. We know baseball is a team sport, and having 1, 2, 3 good guys isn't going to win you a championship. You're better off just tanking, getting a new farm system, and all that good stuff. Lastly, Ender Inciarte. I don't know if I've ever gone on a rant about Ender Inciarte. I love the guy as a player, and it's not something I hold against the Diamondbacks, but it's more a shot at the Phillies with how they handled the situation. Phillies picked him in the Rule 5 draft a few years back, 2013, 2012, whatever it was. And they decided to keep Juan Pierre over him for whatever reason. And Ciarte went on and had a great few years in his career. He's kind of a nobody at this point, but the Phillies kept Juan Pierre over him. I'll never forget that. And so basically I hold that against Arizona to an extent because they're the team that got Ciarte back. Colorado Rockies, Coors Field. Coors Field is the worst ballpark to play at as a pitcher. It is probably the biggest advantage that you can have when you're a home team. Because you look at the Rockies hitters' home and away spreads, it's insane. They're so much better at home. The pitchers are so much worse at home. And there's a lot of things that you have to look at, and you have to consider, obviously the elevation. It's already a big ballpark. So yeah, there's a lot of home runs because it's up high in the mountains. But to counter that, they have the huge outfield, which means you get a lot of doubles and triples. So it's tough to be an opposing pitcher in Colorado. It's a huge advantage if you're the Rockies. Again, this is something that due to geography, you can't necessarily blame the Rockies for it, but still, it had to be mentioned. Losing the 2007 World Series. Nobody who dislikes Boston wanted to see Boston win in 2007. Guess what? Rockies did nothing in the 2007 World Series. I remember that. I was so upset with the Rockies when they lost that World Series. It's just, I don't even know how they got there. They weren't that great, and they just completely fell off the face of the earth once they got to the World Series. That was just disappointing, so yeah. Lastly, the Nolan Arenado saga. So I'm a fan of Arenado. I like what he does as a player. He's obviously a Gold Glover. And basically, the Rockies signed him to this massive extension. I believe it was before the 2020 season began, right after the 2019, something like that. And they end up basically going into a big rebuild after signing him. So typically you sign a star like that to a massive extension, and you're kind of like, all right, we're going to do whatever he wants. If he wants to be traded, we'll trade him immediately because we want to have good terms with his agents, with his agent, with other players. Instead, the Rockies kind of sat on their hands for the 2020 season. They're like, oh, no, we're going to keep him. And then in 2021, he's kind of like, all right, you know what, I'm fine, I'll stay in Colorado. But then the Rockies go and trade him. Now, obviously, he's doing good in St. Louis right now, but still, the whole messy situation with how they treated Arenado, it's going to come back to bite them in the butt. Obviously, Trevor Story is pending free agent, so we'll have to see what happens with that. If I'm Story, I'm not re-signing with this team because we already saw that they're not afraid to trade a big extension player that they just signed a year or two ago. San Diego Padres, constant disappointment. Just like Arizona, this is a team that constantly goes out and goes and spends all this money in free agency and then disappoints. They go from a 70-win team to an 80-win team. And they spent, $100 million in free agency to do that. Is it worth it? No, of course not. The Padres are consistently doing this. And it's mind-boggling to me that they keep doing it. They keep going out and signing these big-name players. And sometimes it works out, but usually it doesn't. Case in point, bullet point 2, Craig Kimbrell. This is just, a definition of that offseason that they had, the 2014 offseason, I believe it was 2014 or 15, when the Padres went out and they signed all these big-name free agents, and then after 1 year, they blew up the whole thing because it didn't work. Now, Kimbrell, obviously, I just used him as an example, but that offseason just summed up the disappointment of the Padres. I don't know what they were doing. I don't know why they did it. It's just, you shouldn't be doing that. This is a young, talented team that should just be focusing on keeping its own players in-house. Now, obviously, sometimes making a move like that works for you because then you can make trades and get players, good young players, but still, it's a waste of your time, effort, and money. Blake Snell. Blake Snell, obviously, he's an interesting player. We'll never forget the 2020 World Series, but the fact that he's on the Padres just makes me dislike the Padres a bit. This is, Snell's the type of player that he has an ego, he has an attitude. He threw a fit about his MLB The Show rating, but he's not doing good this year. And it makes you think, it's like, wait a second now, you want to throw a fit about your rating and then you're struggling? What are you doing? It's a sad situation with Blake Snell. Now, Fernando Tatis Jr., quote-unquote, changing the game. Now, I don't have a problem with this. I understand what he's doing. He wants to have the bat flip. Let him celebrate, okay? The pitchers celebrate after a big strikeout. The batters deserve to be able to celebrate after hitting a homer. But I know a lot of people don't like how he's changing the game. Again, I'm not one of them. I understand what he's doing. I like it how the batters are celebrating now. But it makes you think that he is changing the game, and baseball viewership is going down because of it. It is what it is. They need to focus on the young crowd at this point. Now, my big problem with Tatis is, can the Padres afford his contract? Massive contract. Obviously, they recently signed Machado too a couple off seasons ago. Can they really afford to have those two guys for an additional something like, I think they have 7 more years left on Machado, and of course they have 13 years left on Tatis after the 2021 season. Can they afford that? Or are they just going to end up trading these two guys away like they've been doing with all the other big names that they get? Like Kimbrel, James Shields. Makes you think. Lastly, we have the San Francisco Giants. Now, the first bullet point's relatively weak, leaving New York. They left New York in the 50s. I mean, it is what it is. It was going to happen. New York did not need 3 teams. But the fact that they and the Dodgers left New York, I kind of said, I'm like, you know what? I got to put it as a bullet point. So I understand why they left. I mean, the Mets ended up stepping back in, but Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds is basically the definition of the steroids era for baseball. Him, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa. So I had to mention it. He's the quote-unquote home run king, but he clearly juiced. I would never vote a guy like him into the Hall of Fame. That's me. So, I mean, I don't like him. He had an attitude as well. He was a definite juicer, so no thank you. Barry Zito. Zito's a guy who, as a person, I have no problem with him. But he was such a subpar pitcher that they paid this massive contract to that it really makes you think, what are you doing? Why did you pay this guy that much money? Is he worth it? No. Was he worth it? No, not at all. How did it work out? Horribly. He did good. He got some individual rings, but did he deserve them? Of course not. The 2010 NLCS. This is, of course, the last time the Phillies made the NLCS, second to last time they made the playoffs. So, of course, I'm going to remember this. I remember watching some of these games in the NLCS, and the Giants, they took the first game, then they won games 3, 4. So, They ended up winning the series in 6, but that NLCS was just kind of like the beginning of the end for the Phillies. It was pretty apparent. The Giants were the new team to root for, the new team that was going to be good, and the Phillies were just kind of afterthoughts. But it's just one of those things that I'll always remember. The Giants were the ones who effectively, put an end to the Phillies' run. Technically, that would be the Cardinals, but the Giants were like the ones who shut the door on them. And then, of course, winning 3 World Series in 5 years. You never like dynasties unless you're your favorite team. So I don't like the dynasty of the Giants because, they won 3 of 5 World Series, of course, 2010, 2012, 2014. So it stinks. They beat the Tigers, who I may have mentioned before is my dad's team. So that wasn't great. And, they beat the Rangers. So once more, that's a team. They beat the Royals. These are teams that I don't dislike. So I wasn't necessarily rooting for the Giants. I was rooting against them in all 3 World Series, I'm pretty sure. So, yeah. So now I have to say one good thing about each of these teams. The Giants. They have some players I like, Buster Posey, of course, is the big one. He's definitely up there as one of my favorite catchers in the league by far. They also, they had Madison Bumgarner before he left to go join Arizona. So it was nice to have a pitcher, a pitcher who can hit. Padres. I do like Tatis. I'm a fan of him. He's a young, talented player who's going to continue to grow as he gets older. He's a great face of the league for the future. So I'm excited to see him grow as a player, continue to establish himself. Colorado Rockies. So the Rockies, like I said it before, I liked Arenado when he was on the team. I do like Story still. So they have some guys that I like, but realistically, it's not a team that I'm super excited about because they don't have a lot of other talent. Lastly, we have the Arizona Diamondbacks. I do like the Diamondbacks to an extent. They have a lot of players that I like. Of course, they have Paul Goldschmidt. Well, they had Goldschmidt, I should say. I love Goldschmidt. He's just one of my favorite players in the league, period. They've also had players like Kurt Schilling, Randy Johnson. These are guys who I definitely liked when they were playing. They've had a lot of other bigger names, too. Of course, I remember Jake Lamb when he came up with that team. A.J. Pollock from the state of Connecticut, so I got to give him a shout out before he left and went to the Dodgers. So they have guys that I've liked. Of course, a lot of them are leaving now, but they do have a lot of young, talented players as well in their system. But that is the NL West Rant. Like I said, we discussed the Diamondbacks, Rockies, Padres, and Giants. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Have a good rest of your day.